Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Peoples here to talk about how the civil rights movement starts to take shape in America after World War II. Your learning target for this is I can describe the impact of the civil rights movement. We're going to go all the way back to the beginning of the year when we started talking about the Civil War. And after the Civil War, there was a period of time known as Reconstruction. And in that time of Reconstruction, there was some new amendments made to the Constitution, the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment. The 13th Amendment banned slavery in the United States. The 14th Amendment made every person born in America a citizen, and that any person that is a citizen cannot have rights of life and liberty and property taken away from them without the process of law. And then the 15th Amendment gave African American men the right to vote. Those three amendments provided some freedom and opportunity for newly freed free people in the United States, former slaves who are now free. And for a number of years, up until about the 1870s, 1877 to be exact, they experienced some of that freedom, not without hardship, not without some conflict, but they experienced some of that freedom. Then things changed in 1877. Some of the troops that were in the South enforcing the laws were removed, and the southern state governments started to pass laws that denied some of these rights to African Americans. And in 1896, there was a very important Supreme Court case titled Plessy versus Ferguson that established a rule that as things could be separate amongst the races as long as they were equal. And so this Supreme Court ruling in 1896 said that Southern governments had the right to legally separate the races as long as the separation was equal. And so this created a system in the South known as segregation. And water fountains, schools, trains, buses were all segregated in the South and were legally allowed to do so because of that Supreme Court case. But after World War II, many of these civil rights leaders started to say, you know what, none of these things are not equal. They're definitely separate, but they're definitely not equal. And they figured that schools were a place where they could prove that, show that with evidence. And so that's where they focused their intentions at the beginning of this civil rights movement, is focusing on schools that were segregated. Reality was that segregated schools were not equal. And here you can see on the left side, you have a school for white students, their auditorium, and on the right side, you see a school for black students and the auditorium. These are from two schools in the same town. And then the outside view, you can see on the left of the white school and then on the right of the black school. Very differently made. Oftentimes, black schools were not kept up to the same degree as white schools. And these early civil rights leaders focused on ending segregation in the public schools. The group that led the charge on this was the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. And one courtroom battle in particular that is now well known is the courtroom battle known as the Brown versus Board of Education case. Linda Brown was a 7-year-old African American girl who was from Topeka, Kansas. She was required to make a dangerous trek every day to the school that she could go to because she was black, where a school that she couldn't go to, a white school, was just a couple blocks away from her house. Her father sued the school board of Topeka, Kansas, along with a couple of other students, and worked to try and end segregation in Topeka, Kansas. The lawyer that argued this case in front of the Supreme Court was a man named Thurgood Marshall. He later goes on to become the first African American Supreme Court justice. Here's a picture of Linda Brown and the other children whose parents were suing on their behalf. And the argument was that although things are definitely separate, the children were not in a black school were not getting the same education as children in a white school. And on May 17th, 1954, the Supreme Court was convinced by the evidence presented by Thurgood Marshall, so much that it was a unanimous ruling, 9-0, that the Supreme Court ruled that segregation in public schools was illegal. And then the next year, the court ordered public schools to desegregate. Here you can see the Linda Brown with her mother sitting on the steps of the Supreme Court. Now we're going to fast forward 3 years to Little Rock, Arkansas. Little Rock, Arkansas did not want to integrate their schools all at once. They decided to integrate slowly, one school at a time, and the one school they chose to integrate was Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. They invited 9 outstanding black students to be the 9 students who would enter this school. The governor of Arkansas prevented these students from entering the school. He refused to allow them to attend school. Eventually, President Eisenhower gets involved and sends federal troops to escort the students to school. Here you can see a couple of those photographs. This here is Elizabeth Eckford on the first day being shouted at by an angry mob of whites outside of the school. This is a picture of all 9 of the students that were later known as the Little Rock 9. Governor Faubus, you can see on the Time magazine cover. And then these 2 pictures here represent the troops that Eisenhower sent in to protect those students. And I told you a story about this in class with more detail. But these soldiers were required to escort the kids from class to class and protect them, keep them safe. So those are the first 2 parts of the civil rights movement that we're going to discuss here in class. I'm going to stop here, pause it, and then create another one for some of the other information that we've talked about. So we'll continue on your journey for trying to describe the impact of the civil rights movement on the next video. Thank you very much.